Stellar Blade is a brand new ARPG developed by Shift Up for the PS5. Set in a post-apocalyptic world, humanity has been in a losing war against creatures called the Nativas. We control Eve, who crash lands on Earth in the latest battle against those fearsome foes, where her entire squadron are defeated and brutally torn apart, leaving her the sole survivor. I thought that the start of this game was incredible. The opening cinematic and tutorial did a great job at setting up the stakes and getting you hyped for the rest of the game. Then we get to the first real level, Eidos 7. I thought that this was an amazing starting area. Eve is dropped down into the middle of a post-apocalyptic city, and I just love the tone and atmosphere. It's a visually interesting place to explore, with intriguing architecture and landmarks that really catch your eye. Then there's the music. I was honestly blown away by it. If it reminds you of Nier, well, that's because 40% of the music was created by the sound studio Monica, who were also responsible for the music in Nier. With that being said, I thought the entire soundtrack was amazing. It's one I would actually love to have on vinyl. Anyways, I spent hours exploring Eidos 7. It's just a really fun place to be in. The level design gave me vibes of From Software games. The pacing felt perfect. It was jam-packed full of secrets. It had some really clever puzzles that had great enemy placements. It was honestly everything that I could have hoped for. Now, unfortunately, the whole game isn't like Eidos 7, and I did feel like it fell off a bit after we left the area. So, Stellar Blade is broken down into 4 types of areas. There are 3 linear areas, which all play like Eidos 7. There are 2 areas that are like an FPS horror game. There are 2 open world areas, and then there's a hub area called Zion. So, I'll talk more about the FPS areas when I get into gameplay. I think that makes more sense for them. Zion, humanity's last refuge, I thought it was a pretty cool place. I liked the atmosphere and the vibe of it. The thing that soured it for me was, it's also where so much of the exposition happens, and many of the side quests have you running all around town over and over again. But I'll get more into that when we talk about the story. Now, with the open world areas, this is where I felt the pacing starting to slow down to a snail's pace. So the open world areas are the barren wastelands and the desert, and as you might imagine from their names, they aren't exactly the most visually interesting places. Now, with that being said, I did like the desert a lot more. It had an oasis that I thought was pretty cool. It was nice to see some nature and fresh water for a change. And the city ravaged by the sand and elements was also pretty cool. I think what really disappointed me is they didn't give us any cool ways to travel. What's the point of having a big open area to explore when we have to run everywhere on foot? You know, when I think of my favorite open world games, they always give you cool ways to make traveling faster and more fun. Like a mount, or a hand glider, or a vehicle, or even just the ability to slide across the sand. It felt like they missed an opportunity to add more fun gameplay elements. The last issue I had with the open areas was with the chests that you need a code to open. You know, at first I thought this was a cute gimmick that encouraged exploration, but it stopped being cute when I'd go off the beaten path to explore an underwater cave, swimming deep into its depths. And then my reward is a chest that I don't have the code for. That isn't encouraging exploration, that's suffocating it. Now, just to be clear, I didn't think the open world areas were awful or anything like that. I just thought they were kind of boring and felt disappointing, especially when compared to the more linear levels. Okay, so now let's take a look at the combat and the gameplay. The combat in Stellar Blade just oozes with style. Everything you do just looks really cool, even when you are playing badly. But it isn't just style over substance. The combat does have depth to it. So the game has light and heavy attacks that you string into combos. There's also a gap closer when you hold down the triangle button, which is really fun to use, especially when enemies are trying to retreat. Then you just zip right back on top of them. Eve also has powerful specials called burst and beta abilities. These cost resources that refill as you attack and parry, and by strategically using them, you can actually interrupt enemies and bosses from doing certain nasty attacks. That adds layers of strategy, which I really like, thinking about when would be the best time to use these abilities. A big part of the combat is parrying. Almost every enemy you encounter has pips under their HP, Every time you perfect parry, they lose one of those pips. Take them all out and they become open to your divine retribution, which are really cool looking attacks. My only nitpick is I wish they did a little bit more damage, especially on boss encounters, where you have to perfect parry like 10 attacks, and then your retribution takes off like 3% of the boss's HP. So there's also dodging, you know, for when parrying just won't do. That is to say, some attacks you have to dodge. Now, what's interesting with Stellar Blade is there are two types of dodges. If an enemy glows blue, you want to dodge forward, and if the enemy glows yellow, you want to dodge backwards. Whenever you perfect dodge or parry, you can follow those up with some very satisfying counterattacks. Where the combat starts to become really interesting and intense is when enemies start to string together attacks that you need to dodge and attacks that you need to parry. It's a really fun choreography and looks awesome when you nail it. So what would an ARPG be without some stellar boss encounters? And this game delivers in spades with that. I really liked almost every single boss encounter. I also appreciated that bosses didn't pull that BS where they swing and stop 50% of the way to throw off your parry or dodge timing. The animations felt natural and intuitive. Then there's the gunplay. Boy, was that a surprise for me. I had no idea that Eve would be getting guns. And there are 2 levels dedicated purely to them. They sort of remind me of Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space. They are pretty creepy levels that you have to shoot your way through, with some puzzles and platforming thrown in for good measure. I thought that these levels were awesome. They broke up the gameplay in an interesting way, and the way they designed them was really smart. You were given checkpoints after practically every room, and they provide you with tons of ammunition. They wanted to make sure it wasn't frustrating when they suddenly changed up the gameplay. So where the gameplay falters for me is in 2 places. The first is platforming. So the platforming can be hit and miss. Jumping and generally moving around in open spaces feels fine, and there are some really cool platforming sections when the jumps weren't too precise. But whenever they added any kind of precision, it felt like I was always fighting with the controls. Eve's movement can be pretty clunky and tank-like, and the way the momentum works makes precision platforming feel kind of bad and led to a lot of frustration. The other place it faltered for me was in one of the final boss encounters. For the last 3 boss encounters, the difficulty spike is insane. They are much, much harder than every other boss. But the difficulty I was actually fine with. The problem I had is they also introduced a brand new one-shot mechanic. You know, I think that towards the end of a game, boss encounters should be kind of like a final exam, to test you on everything you've learned up to that point. I thought adding a mechanic we've never seen before on an encounter that is already incredibly difficult was kind of cheap. Okay, so to end this impression, let's quickly talk about the story. Stellar Blade's story wears its inspiration right on its sleeve. It is an amalgamation of The Matrix, Ghost in the Shell, iRobot, Nier, you know, stories of that genre, which is a great genre. I love the themes of humans, robots, and morality. The existential crisis of what does it mean to be alive? However, for me, the narrative in Stellar Blade fell somewhat flat. I saw many of the reveals and plot twists coming right from the start, and the writers weren't exactly trying to subvert my expectations. And that's not a bad thing per se, especially if you are new to the genre, but for me, many of the cutscenes dragged on. The exposition dumps in particular, I was really bored by, and in my mind I kept saying, I know, can we go on already, please? This leads to one of the most baffling design decisions. You can't skip the cutscenes. You also can't really speed through the dialogue. It's 2024. There is absolutely no reason for that. Even if this was the greatest story of all time, that still wouldn't be an excuse. Now, with that being said, I did like how they handled the existential crisis of what's it mean to be alive. There were some side quests that were incredible with how they handled those themes. Unfortunately, there were also many side quests that I thought were pretty boring, and they felt largely like they were designed as filler to extend my playtime. One in particular has you running all over Zion looking for computer screens. I thought that objective was really boring and also So overall, I think that this was a fantastic game. It was so much fun, and the issues I had really didn't matter in the end. I would still put this in my top 10 favorite ARPGs. Anyways, that will be all for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, bye!